So we've already reviewed the first 6 Friday the 13th movies, and we took a nice break. Everybody's had a great holiday. Now it's time to get the reviews back on track. And what better than to start with the Kane Hodder era of Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, stars Lar Park Lincoln, Kane Hodder, and is directed by John Carl Buechler. So Friday Part 7 is an interesting one for me because this was the first Friday movie I actually saw in the movie theater. I saw this in a packed house. Everybody loved this movie to death. I had a blast with it. And I loved this movie for years and years, but it hasn't aged that well, but we'll get to that. So some of you might not know this, but way back in the late 80s, there was already rumblings of a Freddy vs. Jason movie. Both these icons were ruling the silver screen around the same time, so all these producers really wanted to get them together because they knew it would be a no-brainer. It would be a box office smash. But they couldn't get all the pieces together to make this happen, so they thought, what is the next best thing that we can do? We need to give Jason a formidable opponent. So Friday the 13th Part 7 actually takes place quite a few years after the events of Part 6. We see a young Tina Shepard at the beginning of this movie, and she has trouble controlling her telekinetic powers, and in the process she ends up killing her father, who ends up being thrust to the bottom of the lake where Jason is. So then we fast forward another 7-8 years. Tina is a teenager. She gets into an argument with her therapist, goes to the lake, and Jason is resurrected from the lake. And now we have our movie. And so early in the movie, we have a crop of teens that show up at Camp Crystal Lake, and they are planning a birthday party for one of their friends. And of course, Jason starts picking them off one by one. Now, Friday the 13th Part 7 actually has a lot going for it because it tried something different with the franchise, and it tried to give Jason an opponent. This is something that had never been done before. So it kind of upped the stakes. And thank God they did that because the paper-thin characters in this movie would have ruined it. But Tina is actually a worthy opponent, and she is an engaging character. Now for me, Part 7 is the entry that really starts the franchise in a downward spiral, and it never really picks itself back up from that spiral. But first, let's talk about some of the things that I think are really cool about Part 7. First of all, Tina Shepard is actually a very worthy opponent. She keeps the story engaging throughout, and very early in the movie we see that she is actually very powerful, and we realize that once her and Jason do go head to head, it's actually going to be a pretty decent fight. There's one scene in the movie where she's getting into an argument with the therapist, as she normally does in the movie, and things go haywire and she starts moving everything just like something out of Star Wars. The whole room starts shaking. She picks up a TV, throws it across, and she does all this with her mind. The force is strong with Tina. Now next, let's talk about Jason. This is the birth of the Kane Hodder era of Jason. Many of you Friday fans know Kane Hodder was actually in 4 Jason movies, and this was the first. And I think this is arguably one of the coolest looking Jasons out of the whole bunch, because director John Carl Buechler, he researched every previous Jason movie, and he wanted to insert every single scar, every single imperfection into the look of Jason. And at this point, he literally looks like a walking zombie, a skeleton. And director John Carl Buechler has an effects background, and I think this movie really benefited from that because Jason really looks awesome in this movie. And also, Kane Hodder really had the mannerisms down. He created his own Jason character, and he played him differently than everybody before. You can tell that he really wanted to take Jason to another level, and I definitely give him props for that. I've said before that my favorite Jason is Ted White, but Kane Hodder still does a damn good job. And I'll go even further and say I was just outraged when they didn't give the part of Jason in Freddy vs. Jason to Hodder. I thought he would have been awesome going against Freddy. Also, the final showdown between Jason and Tina is badass. I remember in the theater, they were throwing stuff at the screen. It was awesome. And for a while there, Tina was really just whipping the shit out of Jason. She's such a great opponent because she doesn't even have to touch him. She can just use her mind, and whatever she dreams up, she can do to him. Now, Part 7 definitely has some lacking aspects, for lack of a better term, and the biggest of those is the characters. This is probably where the characters really start going south. You don't give two craps about any of these characters. They became really formulaic and cliche, and you had kind of the token sci-fi lover guy, Star Mummy. And then you had the little love triangle where these two girls were fighting over this one guy. Basically, you couldn't wait for these characters to get killed off. Also, the kills are pretty lackluster in this movie, and I can't really blame the movie. I have to blame the MPAA. They scrutinized this movie to death. Friday the 13th Part 7 is basically a neutered slasher flick. They were pretty much forced to cut the camera right before the quote-unquote money shot, if you will. And I never realized that for years when I first watched it. And then I saw quite a few documentaries about the movie, and when I went back and watched it, I realized that, yeah, all these kills are pretty ineffective. And thank God for the final showdown between Tina and Jason, because otherwise you would have had some pretty weak violence in this movie. So having said all that, Part 7 is still one that I frequent quite a bit. And I would definitely give it a humdrum. It's not great, but it's not bad either. I still enjoy it from time to time. So what I want to know from you guys is, what are your thoughts on Part 7, The New Blood? And stay tuned for my future reviews on the Friday franchise. Guys, thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And Humdrum out. And John Carl Buchler is, and director Buchler has a, and director John